Hello guys, welcome to Sports Psychology A2 screencast on emotional control. Key specification objective we're going to be focusing on today is going to be this. Now I've done this because this is basically an AS topic. Okay, so it's exactly the same as last year where we looked at the inverted U theory and we analysed it. So if you remember last year, the inverted U theory proposed that as arousal increases, so does performance up to an optimal midpoint. Okay, in order to analyse that theory, you had to say that optimal performance doesn't always occur at a midpoint or a moderate amount of arousal. Some variables dictate that, high performance can take place under high arousal, okay, or high performance can also take place under low arousal, depending on three key variables. Now, if you remember last year, I said in order to be able to kind of analyse the inverted U theory, which I'll go to here, you look at this and say, right, the key thing here is, I said the inverted U theory comes up, okay, you have to be able to pat the boob. So you have to be able to talk about the key variables of personality, ability, task type, you pat it, which will make sure that you can kind of analyse it. So from there, if you remember, we're basically saying low arousal will lead to high performance for a certain personality type. So for example, low arousal equals optimal performance or high performance for introvert personalities, and that's, again, we've just done this in a lesson very recently where we've talked about social facilitation due to the fact they have a highly sensitive or hypersensitive reticular activating system. Okay, it's also good for people who have low ability, e.g. cognitive performance, because they have a poorly learned motor program, or an unrefined motor program stored in the long-term memory. In terms of task, the tasks that kind of performed optimally at low arousal are those that are fine and complex. Okay, so we have to think about things. So, basically we're repeating a lesson not only did in AS, but also what you just completed for the drive theory of social facilitation. So these lessons are virtually carrying on, and you're doing exactly the same thing. So going on from there, high arousal then, if we look at that relationship between high arousal and personality, ability and task type, we've got this concept here where you're saying that high arousal being pumped up physiologically and psychologically activated will lead to high performance for extrovert personalities due to a kind of desensitized or low sensitivity of the reticular activating system in the brain. It also optimizes performance for people of high ability or autonomous performers due to the fact they have a well-learned motor program. And finally, it will lead to high arousal will lead to high performance for tasks that are simple and gross. Okay, so basically you're thinking of weight training, shot put, anything like that. So that question, you look back, if you go back to the kind of thing at the start, the question you would get, demonstrate knowledge and understanding of activation and arousal. Bearing in mind we talked about arousal last year, is that psychological and physiological activation and readiness to perform. Okay, and you're basically saying what is the relationship between arousal and personality, ability and task type. AS, you didn't get that. You sometimes get this in the question this year. So if we go on from there then, okay, that's not all you're doing today. When you find that level that you perform optimally at, so some people it can be high arousal, some people it can be under low arousal, some people it can be under moderate arousal, depending on the kind of nature of the task, the ability level, personality, etc. So basically, when you do find that, there is a name for it in A2, and it's called the individual zone of optimal functioning. Now, the individual zone of optimal functioning basically says that kind of starts to introduce this term anxiety, which is like a negative thing, but it's saying that some people respond differently to this kind of fear of failure. Some people can perform really well with high levels of anxiety, okay? Other people can perform really poorly with high levels of anxiety. Whatever the thing is, when you find that optimal level, it's called the zone of optimal functioning. So in the question, it might talk about your individual or being in the zone. This is what it's talking about, the individual zone in which you perform optimally at. Now, when you do that, it leads to a very, very important kind of concept, and it's something called peak flow. Our peak flow has never been examined. It's one of about 3 topics in A2 that has never come up in an exam. Activity and time-based goals are one. This is the other. Okay, so certainly for psychology. So if you look at this now, peak flow refers to optimal performance with high level of intrinsic fulfillment. So all I need from you is to say, right, that is a definition of peak flow, and peak flow occurs when you're in your individual zone of optimal functioning. Okay, that zone in which you're optimally functioning, that's individual to you. Some high, some low arousal, some moderate, depending on your kind of those 3 variables. So that's what the definition of peak flow is. That's the toughest thing you're going to have to do. because after that I've got an acronym. We're going to change peak flow. Okay, we're going to respell it, and it's going to be called PAAAK flow. Okay, so if you look over here, you've got it onto here. Peak equals PAAAK. Okay, so I'll put it down to here. So basically what you're doing is this. You're basically saying that peak flow, we've got that bit on there. If you're going to experience peak flow, that intrinsic fulfillment, satisfaction when you're performing optimally, you have to be in the autonomous phase of learning, because you need to be there in order to have that perfect performance. Secondly, it's kind of quite easy now because you can link that to a characteristic of the autonomous phase of learning, because skills are performed automatically without kind of cognitive processing. It's performed automatically. Only people can have peak flow, and I'm thinking now, and I'll show you some clips tomorrow, people at peak flow. Messi when he's in his absolute best. A rugby player who kicks every conversion in a game. They are experiencing peak flow because they can do things automatically or habitually without any cognitive or conscious thought. The next thing we're looking at is that they can match the attentional style that is required to the situation that is needed for. Now, you haven't done attentional styles, but I might kind of do that maybe tomorrow in the lesson. We talked about it, a lot of you talked about it in your talk, so you had narrow, broad, and internal, external. So basically, you can switch it. Sometimes you'll need a narrow external attentional style, e.g. when you're catching a ball. When you catch the ball, it needs to go to an external broad, because you need to pre-scan where you're going to pass and run. The final thing then, okay, is confidence. So the only people who can really perform at the individual zone of optimal function or experience peak flow are those who have high levels of sport confidence. Okay, so you can't perform, you can't have peak flow, you can't hit your peak performance unless you have high levels of confidence. That would make sense. Okay, we've just done the level on lesson on confidence. So there's your screencast for tonight. 2 topics we've looked at, kind of the relationship between arousal and personality, ability, and task type. Finally, we've looked at that kind of individual zone where people perform optimally, and when you do, you experience peak flow. These 2 terms used interchangeably, so you have to know the individual zone of optimal function is referring to peak flow. If peak flow comes up, you need to mention individual zone of optimal functioning. They're the same thing, but peak flow there's more to write about. Okay, thank you very much.